On a ferry, crossing the Sognefjord before 7, a deckhand in an orange jacket checks the chain on a row of parked cars, while the batteries beneath the steel floor take their charge from water that fell as snow months earlier. An hour north, in a coastal kindergarten cloakroom, a 5-year-old pushes both boots into snow trousers, dressing for the weather before breakfast is finished. On a quay near Bergen, crates of cod are stacked and counted, breath fogging over the ice, the price chalked up as it was last week. This is Norway. Five and a half million people strung along a coastline longer than the distance around the planet, and one of the wealthiest nations that has ever existed. And yet, almost nothing on the surface behaves like wealth. The fortune sits offshore in a fund no citizen may empty, while far to the north, Sami reindeer herders still carry the cost of who paid for that prosperity. What follows is a single Norwegian day, from the first ferry to the last lamp in a cabin, and the quiet rules that keep a rich country living as if it still has something to prove. With the chain checked and the cars settled, the crossing on the Sognefjord, the longest ice-free fjord in the country, begins as a matter of routine. The cars rolling down the ramp in the half-light, a line of commuters and delivery vans, and a single school bus easing onto the deck between painted lines. The deckhand waves them forward with one gloved hand and counts them without seeming to count, and a child at the rail rests a mittened hand on the cold steel and watches the water turn over below. The mountain walls rise straight from the fjord on either side. 2,000 meters of rock, still dark at the top. Here, the ferry is not an attraction, but a road. One link in a public network that treats a fjord crossing the way another country treats a bridge. Scheduled and ordinary and paid for in common. Nearly 90% of the nation's electricity comes from water, from snowmelt and rain falling through mountain turbines. And so the sound expected of the morning, the diesel growl, never comes. What comes instead is something close to nothing, a near silent glide across the water, no exhaust trailing from the stern, only the wash of the bow and the wind off the heights. Norway runs one of the largest electric ferry fleets on Earth. The batteries stored beneath the deck and recharged in minutes at each quay. The whole arrangement built to sit out of sight. There is an old word for the impulse behind it: dugnad, the shared, collective effort a community gives without payment. The volunteer Saturday spent fixing what belongs to everyone. A national ferry network is dugnad scaled to a country. a crossing no single passenger could ever fund, carried instead by all of them together. That older version still sails. Since 1893, a coastal ship has worked its way up the seaboard from Bergen in the south to Kirkenes near the Russian border, calling at 34 ports, many of them villages with no other reliable link to the rest of the country. It carries passengers, but it has always carried more than that. The mail and the medicine, crates of supplies and engine parts, a coffin returning home, a midwife heading out. For the towns along the route, it is a lifeline. Arriving at the same hour, a working vessel with nothing of the holiday about it. The coast it serves was settled long before any of the wealth arrived. In Lofoten, above the Arctic Circle, the villages still sit where the fish are. Red painted cabins stand on wooden stilts at the water's edge, their reflections breaking in the harbor. And on the racks above the shoreline, thousands of cod hang split and paired to dry in the cold Arctic wind. For 1,000 years before a single barrel of oil came ashore, this was the country's fortune. Dried cod traded south to Europe, a catch that built churches and bought land and fed families through the dark months. The winter fishery still lands its haul each year, the boats going out in weather that would close most harbors. The work passed down because the fish keep their old appointment off the islands. Holding all of it together takes more than ferries. Across a country folded into mountains and split by water, the state has bored more than 1,000 road tunnels through the rock and beneath the fjords. Among them, the Lærdal Tunnel, 24.5 kilometers of road inside a mountain, the longest of its kind anywhere. The headlights enter the dark and the sea disappears behind. And inside, soft blue-lit caverns are spaced along the route so drivers do not lose themselves to the monotony of stone. Access here is treated as a basic right, a road owed to a village of 300 as surely as to a city. And as the morning lifts, the krone that ferry earned at first light is already moving south, toward an account in the capital that no government is permitted to drain. By the time the capital has fully woken, the country's fortune has a skyline. And it is a restrained one. Along the inner harbor of Oslo, a row of slim glass towers stands shoulder to shoulder, set at angles to one another, so that no single building dominates the water, the trams sliding past their feet and the commuters crossing in front with coffee cups and prams. Behind those windows sits the management of the largest sovereign wealth fund on Earth, a holding of well over $1.5 trillion that owns close to 1.5% of every listed company in the world, a stake in factories and ports and office towers across more than 70 countries. And yet, the district that runs it asks for almost no attention. No gold, no spectacle, a working waterfront where the money keeps office hours. The first oil came ashore in 1969. The law that built the fund was passed in 1990, and the first transfer of money into it was made in 1996. The vast field that opened far out in the North Sea in 2019 carries the name of Johan Sverdrup, the 19th century Prime Minister who fought to put real power in the hands of Parliament, a man of rules, lending his name to a reservoir of oil. Inside one of those towers, on a quiet Friday with half the desks already empty, a single monitor holds a number that climbs by the second, the figure ticking upward beside a thermos of coffee gone cold and a cursor blinking in an open spreadsheet that no one is sitting over. Norwegians call it oljefondet, the oil fund, though its formal name is heavier and its discipline heavier still. The rule that governs it is almost monastic. The capital is never to be spent, only the harvest. And the harvest is capped at the expected real return, 3% a year, lowered from 4% in 2017, when that was judged too generous. Every krona is invested outside the country, deliberately, so that the fortune cannot distort the economy at home or be quietly drained by a government in a difficult year. The principle was named here long before the money grew large, for it was a Norwegian, the former Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland, who in 1987 defined sustainable development as meeting the needs of the present without robbing the future of its own. And the fund is that sentence turned into law. A country treating its wealth as property, borrowed from people not yet born. That patience shows up at the curb too. On a wet street in any Norwegian town, in the grey light of an ordinary afternoon, a driver fits a charging cable into the side of a car and waits in the rain while the battery draws its current from the rivers that move the ferries. A nation that built its fortune selling petroleum to the world now buys almost nothing but electric cars at home. More than 4 in every 5 new vehicles sold. The oil loaded onto tankers for export, while the roads inside the country run on hydropower. There is no triumph in the gesture, only routine. A person topping up a battery the way an earlier generation topped up a tank. And the strange law against spending holds year after year. No tower guards it. It holds because 3 times a day, at breakfast, at lunch, at supper, ordinary people live as if the fund were not there at all. The breakfast table tells that story again, smaller. In a kitchen in any Norwegian town, before the school bus rounds the corner, a child stands at the counter with a dark loaf and a butter knife and builds the day's lunch alone, laying slices of bread flat on a square of waxed paper, while a parent drinks coffee at the table. This is the matpakke, the packed lunch carried into nearly every school, office, cabin, and building site in the country. Open slices laid one above another, with a sheet of paper set between them, so the fillings do not press together in the bag. There is nothing performed about it. The few toppings return week after week. The bread is the plain dark kind, and the child building it expects no hot meal waiting at midday, and has never been promised one. A surgeon and an apprentice carpenter unwrap the same kind of parcel at noon, the paper folded the way a parent folded it before them. In a country wealthy enough to buy the world a lunch, the lunch is bread laid on bread, and the child folds the paper shut and pushes the parcel into a school bag. What goes on the bread is, as often as not, a slab of the country's brown quay cheese, cut from the block with a steel slicer that lifts a thin curl of it free, caramel brown and faintly sweet, soft enough to bend over the dark crust. It is barely cheese at all. The whey left from making cheese, boiled down for hours until the milk sugars darken and thicken into a firm, sweet block, a way of wasting nothing on a farm where nothing could be spared. What began as the frugal habit of a household short of everything has become a national taste. The flavor a child meets first and keeps for the rest of a life. The brown block sitting in the door of nearly every refrigerator, from the city flats to the cabins on the bare mountain. The bread and the cheese come almost always from a plain shop. At the checkout of a Norwegian supermarket, the conveyor carries the modest goods past the till. The dark bread, the block of brown cheese, a liter of milk, a bag of coffee. Dropped into a cloth bag a customer has carried for years. The shelves behind run to discount chains that compete on price and nothing else. The aisles narrow and the choices few. No luxury counter laid out to be admired. Food here is stocked and priced as a shared baseline. The same loaf at one price within reach of everyone. A quiet leveling, done at the till and never announced. Sameness is the rule, and the country keeps it without much comment, save for one morning a year. On the 17th of May, the sameness dresses up. The Constitution was signed at Eidsvoll in 1814, and every year since, the country has marked the day not with soldiers and tanks, but with children. The schools of each town walking in procession behind their banners, flags in mittened hands, a brass band a little out of step. Many of the marchers wear the regional costume, hand-stitched and handed down. Its embroidery naming the valley a family comes from. In Oslo, the children's parade winds up toward the royal palace, where King Harald V, on the throne since 1991, stands on the balcony and waves back hour after hour at ordinary school children in their home colors. Those flags rise that morning far to the north too, in a sharper wind off the plateau, lifted by the children of the people on whom this contract was written heaviest of all, and never fully put to them as a choice.
Far to the north, on the Finnmark Plateau, the wind that lifts those flags runs unbroken across open snow. And out on it, a herd of reindeer moves in a slow brown tide. The Sami herders working at its edges, turning the animals by reading the snow. The Sami are the indigenous people of the European Arctic, and they have followed the reindeer across this country for centuries. Their roots between winter and summer pasture, a living claim on the land older than any deed. Roughly 40 herding districts still spread across Finnmark and the north. The work measured in seasons. At a corral fence, as the light goes, a herder fills a cup from a battered thermos and passes it steaming, hand to gloved hand to the next. The reindeer milling and clicking behind the rails. The breath of animals and people hanging together in the cold. Above the herd, the cost of the country's comfort runs on steel. Lines of pylons stride across the white grazing land, carrying hydropower and the current of new wind farms south toward the cities and the lit kitchens and the charging cars. The grid laid straight over pasture the herders have always crossed. The collision is not abstract. In 2021, the Supreme Court of Norway ruled that the wind farm at Fosen, its turbines built on reindeer herding land, violated the rights of the Sami who graze there, a judgment as plain as any the country has handed down. And yet, the turbines kept turning, year after year past the ruling. The law on one side and the spinning blades on the other, until the gap between them became a protest in the streets of the capital and an apology from the state. This is not new, and it has a name and a river. On the Alta River, in a canyon where fast water cuts through the rock, the state moved at the end of the 1970s to build a hydroelectric dam, and the largest act of civil disobedience in the country's modern history rose to stop it. Through 1979 and into 1981, activists chained themselves across the access road and pitched camp in the snow. A group went on hunger strike outside the parliament, and in the winter of 1981, the state cleared the site with an operation of some 600 police. The dam was built, but the fight changed the country, and out of it came the Sami Parliament, opened in 1989, a chamber for the very people the dam was raised over. Behind the dam and the pylons lies a longer and quieter policy. For more than a century, from the middle of the 1800s into the 1960s, the state pursued what it called Norwegianization, a deliberate effort to dissolve the Sami into the nation. And, in a snowbound village with smoke standing straight from the chimneys, the memory of it sits close beneath the surface. Children were sent to boarding schools and punished for speaking their own language. Families were pressed to take Norwegian names and Norwegian ways. A whole culture treated as something to be corrected. Aili Keskitalo, who later served as president of the Sami Parliament, has reportedly spoken of a generation taught to be ashamed of who they were. The damage of those years is not yet a century settled. The language still recovering, the apology still recent. Off the northern coast, on the steep island of Senja, the short day is already ending, the sharp peaks blackening against a last, low band of grey, the sea going dark between the headlands. The reckoning here is unfinished, carried in court rulings and apologies that arrive a generation late, in a language being taught again to children whose grandparents were beaten for it. The North has paid, and pays still, its share of the bill for the comfort further south. And as the Arctic light fails over Senja and the herd settles for the night, the day is not yet over. Far to the south, the light still holds a while longer, and the offices are beginning to empty toward the forest. On the edge of Oslo, the forest begins almost where the tram stops. And on a Friday in winter, as the short afternoon goes dark, the trails into the Nordmarka fill with people on cross-country skis, the beams of head torches bobbing through dark spruce, small children towed behind on sledges, dogs running at the side. What they are doing has a name: friluftsliv, open-air living. And it carries more weight than a hobby, for it holds the time spent outdoors in plain weather is not an escape from ordinary life, but a part of staying whole. Children are taught it before they can read, sent out to play in rain and snow at kindergartens that keep them outside for hours in weather other countries would treat as a reason to stay in. The skis come down from the wall almost as soon as a child can stand. What lets them go is partly a law. The right to roam, written down in the Outdoor Recreation Act of 1957, gives anyone the freedom to walk, ski, camp, and pick berries across uncultivated land, no matter who owns it, so long as a tent is kept a fair distance from any house, and the ground is left as it was found. Anyone may step onto the trail, pay nothing, and ask no one. And the open mountain is treated as something owed to all of them, access as plain a right as the tunnels and the ferries of the morning. Many of those trails end at a cabin. There are something near 440,000 of them across the country, on islands and beside lakes, and high on the bare mountain. And the surprising thing about the Norwegian cabin is how little it sets out to be. The traditional one has no running water and no road to the door, a wood stove, a paraffin lamp, an outhouse in the snow, reached on the last stretch by ski or on foot with a pack on the back. A country that could warm every room at the touch of a screen chooses, on its weekends, to carry water from a stream in a bucket and to split its own wood against the cold. The point seems to be the smallness itself, the deliberate return to less, one of the richest peoples on earth checking again and again that it can still do without. Inside, as the early dark comes down, a parent kneels at the iron stove and feeds in birch split that morning, the bark catching with a crackle and the heat beginning to push back from the metal, while at the table,
A child turns up the wick of a paraffin lamp until the room steadies into a low, yellow light. There is no television here and almost no signal, only the fire ticking in the grate, the wind worrying at the window, a pot of coffee warming on the stovetop, and the plain supper of any night of the week. The last lamp in the country burns not in a palace or a glass tower, but in one small wooden room at the end of an unploughed track. And beyond the glass, the snow goes on falling in the dark. By the time the cabin lamp is put out, the water that charged the morning ferry is still moving under ice and stone, falling toward turbines no passenger will see. In Oslo, the account keeps its numbers elsewhere, outside the country, beyond the reach of a Friday appetite. In Lofoten, cod stiffen in the wind. On a kitchen counter, the last crumbs from a matpacker are brushed into a palm, and somewhere a child, not yet born, has already been counted into the budget. The wealth stays mostly invisible, passing through roads, batteries, school lunches, and rules, never quite becoming display. A worker closes a laptop. A charging cable clicks into place. Tomorrow takes the current.